Lots of legislation have been passed and a budget has been amended, but what does it mean for us here in Hampton Roads, and more specifically here in the city of Norfolk? Joining us to discuss the General Assembly session, looking back, looking forward, the 2025 General Assembly review, we have none other than my good friend and our delegate here, Delegate Bonita Anthony, representing the 92nd House District here in the city of Norfolk. As always, we want to thank you for joining us, as you always do, on this Sunday morning here in Hampton Roads as we broadcast from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation. The greeting go from none other than WSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. Well, I've got my good friend here, Delegate Bonita Anthony. Thank you again for joining us on this Sunday morning. We know your schedule's busy. We know your faith is important to you, and God is good all the time.
All the time. Don't get started here.
Well, look, we're going to need a little church after what we see going on around here.
Absolutely. Goodness.
Well, first of all, how are you today?
I'm doing well in the midst of all the things that are happening above the Potomac. We are alive. It's good to be heard and seen and alive, and we are here fighting for Virginians.
Absolutely. You know, when you say fighting for Virginians, you know, I don't think a lot of our citizens really understand, you know, what takes place, you know, when you talk about fight, you know, on the floor of the House, over in committees, subcommittees, and not just that, you know, but then also just fighting to get your voice heard, which is not just your voice, but the voice of the people which you represent.
Listen, it's a year-round process. It doesn't just happen while we're in session, you know, in the first part of the year. But that fight happens every single day, every time we go to a homeowners association or civic league, when we talk to our constituents, we are gathering information. Every time we meet with organizations and stakeholders, we are fighting, we are working, we are meeting. And then when we get into the legislative session, you know, it happens with from the result of all of those meetings, drafting legislation that is going to impact everybody's lived experiences, everybody's everyday lives, to be able to fight for working families, to be able to fight for the most vulnerable, to be able to fight for Virginians to be able to live, to breathe, to move, and for our kids to have a world-class education, for our seniors to be able to take care of themselves. We are on the fight every day, from education, workforce development, to environmental justice, protecting our health care, strengthening, landlord-tenant laws to make sure there's affordable housing, to make sure that we eradicate food insecurity from everything, from strengthening our economic stance, here in the Commonwealth. It's an everyday experience where we're in committee, we're in subcommittee, we're fighting for legislation, we're blocking legislation that's going to hurt Virginians, and when we get to the floor, we're defending our constituents, we're defending our neighbors and our constituents, and we're voting for things that are going to make sure that we stand fast, that money is appropriated in a way that it's going to take care of all of us. Democrats have been on the forefront of making sure that they pass legislation that's going to take care of everyone and not just the upper 1%.
Absolutely. When you talk about food insecurity, immediately I thought about the price of eggs.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, that was like the main thing. Everybody's worried about the price of eggs, but,
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, the federal administration has made the price of everything almost unreachable, and are threatening some of our folks who are, depend on federal dollars in order to take care of their families, particularly with the threat of rolling back, federal funding with Medicaid, with SNAP benefits, and, with, the ongoing crisis with EBT card skimming and defrauding. It's monumental. And so, we are working diligently to make sure that we are, we're going to, take care of what Virginia needs. And we have to hold the line on that. And so even if you don't see a post on social media, because we know the algorithms do not work in our favor all the
Right.
time, know that we are constantly working every single day. They say that this job is part-time, that we are citizen legislators. Yes, we are citizen legislators, but every single day for hours and hours upon end, we are working. We are working and we're fighting for Virginians.
Absolutely. So, look, I want to take it from the beginning. I mean, that's a great overview of what takes place for a part-time job. You know,
Yes.
I mean, people don't realize. I mean, our representatives, you know, you, our delegate, our senators. I mean, this is not a full-time job. This is more like a calling, but it is paid part-time.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness.
You know, it is a calling. But let's start from the beginning. You know, this session, and for those that listen to the show religiously, you know that this time of the year we cover the legislative session from January to February, and then we do our wrap up, you know, a look back, a look forward in March. And this year, this session started a little rocky. We had something called a water crisis in Richmond. I mean, we had people, you know, what people don't understand, you know, people, when you turn on the faucet and the water doesn't come out, you know, or you can't drink the water or boil, you know, and cook with the water. You got to use bottled water, and you got to use some baby wipes and just kind of keep it together until the water's good. You know,
oh my goodness, yes.
You know, so the session started a little late, but we were talking before the show, and you made a statement that really, I think, symbolizes, you know, what we're experiencing now in that water crisis. Talk to our citizens about, our listeners about what that conversation was about.
So, you know, of course, you know, not only we had heavy inclement weather with snow, we had this water crisis. And so I was saying about our infrastructure with, you know, was failing at that time, and when people did not have access to water at all. And of course, you know, clean water. And, you know, we don't have water, you know, that's, you know, that is a crisis. And so I was saying that maybe the breakdown of infrastructure was a foretelling about what is actually happening now. You know, everything that we have depended on that was surefire is now crumbling before our eyes. And so, you know, how in the world do we stay resilient in the midst of, you know, infrastructure breaking down, things that we thought was surefire, that was reliable. Now we're finding that it's not reliable. And so, you know, we had to persevere. We had a late start on the session, ended up starting on January 13th, was a few days late. However, you know, our speaker, Don Scott, is very efficient. And so we had made a promise to Virginians that even though it was a late start, that we were going to do all the things that we needed to do, and we were going to pass a balanced budget, which we have to do, and we're going to do it on time. And so throughout the legislative session, and that meant, you know, longer days on the floor. There was one of the longest days that we spent on the floor was about 10 hours going through legislation, making sure that we voted out pieces of legislation so that we could, you know, go and have crossover where our legislation that passed out of the House will go over to the Senate, and so it gets vetted in the Senate, and so that once it gets out of the Senate, then it goes to the governor's desk. But that's what happened. You know, we fought hard for Virginians. We came forth with a budget that was balanced, that was, you know, invested in education more than ever, that invested in our communities, the health care, you know, more than ever. We fought for our workforce. We put family first, and we made sure that our community stayed strong. We finished on time on February 22nd, which was the end of session, where we adjourned sine die. However, I did want to, you know, let people know that in the midst of the chaos that is happening in Washington, even though we adjourned the 2025 legislative session on February 22nd, people don't realize that we are still in the 2024 special session. So we did not adjourn from the 2024 special session. We are only in recess. And what does that mean? That the General Assembly can be recalled with a 48-hour notice to address the emergency conditions that are happening around us, just in case we face the rollback of Medicaid, or we have to address the tremendous federal reductions, the federal workers who are being impacted by what's happening in D.C. at this very moment. The General Assembly can be recalled at a moment's notice to address those crises.
Wow.
But another thing that our speaker did do, he formed a special House committee, and the Senate also formalized their special committee on the impacts of federal workforce and funding reductions. And myself and Delegate Mike Fagans, we represent the Hampton Roads area on that particular special committee, along with some of our other Democratic colleagues. It's chaired by Delegate David Bulova. We also have Delegate Joshua Cole, Delegate Josh Thomas, Delegate Vivian Watts, and then we have some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are part of this bipartisan committee to make sure that we assess and evaluate those federal impacts to our workforce and for, our federal funding, because 1/3 of the state budget depends on federal funds. Our neighbors over on the Southwest Virginia, most of their local budgets depend on federal funds for their infrastructure, for their public education, for their health care. And so we have to make sure that we are forward-thinking, that we are being proactive in what we do. And so I appreciate our speaker for forming that special committee, and we are going to be having our public meetings across the Commonwealth. We had our very first meeting on Saturday, February 22nd, right on the last day of session, and the meeting was several hours long, and we had several presentations, including from the Virginia Employment Commission, who gave presentations about, what happened in 2020 with the pandemic crisis, and whether they are ready or have the capacity to handle the claims from our federal workforce who want to apply for unemployment benefits. We also heard from the Weldon Cooper Center from UVA, who has given us good data about what in the world these reductions, what the impact will be on our transportation infrastructure, the impact on our health care, the impact on public education, the impact on our localities and our planning districts. We also heard from the Virginia Municipal League, along with VACO as well, about what will happen to localities and what their, budgets depend on as far as federal funding. What would that do for climate resiliency and environmental justice? What would that do, for all of us in making sure that Virginians are taken care of? And so we're going to be focused on our next set of meetings on different topics. What is going to happen to our military, our veterans, all the things. So our next meeting is actually on April 8th in Alexandria. And so, of course, we know there's a tremendous amount of federal workforce in Northern Virginia. We're also going to be hearing testimony about the impacts of higher education as well as our transportation infrastructure. In May, we're going to be in Southwest Virginia to hear the impact on our rural localities. And then in June, we're going to be in Hampton Roads hearing about defense contractors, what's happening with our industry here, military and veterans, and also K-12 education. So we're going to be, forming all of this information so that when we have to come back into special session to address these challenges that happen on a daily basis in Washington, that Virginia is going to be ready. And, just note that we are working on this issue. We just don't want people to panic because there are changes every day. And so we have to assess what are those things that are happening and how it's going to impact us and what Virginia can do in order to make sure that not only that we take care of our citizens, but not bankrupt the state.
Absolutely. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric Claville. You're joining us for our Looking Back, Looking Forward review of the General Assembly session 2025. Joining us, we have none other than my good friend and our delegate here that represents none other than Norfolk State
Yes.
University. Behold the green and gold. Delegate Bonita Anthony joining us to discuss legislation that was passed by the House and the General Assembly this session that is at the governor's desk. Last,
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
with the last opportunity to sign or take action on the
Take
24th.
action or not take action.
Right. On tomorrow, March 24th. So we're going to see what happens. But, you talked about the emergency committee to study the impact of what's happening federally coming down from Washington. People are afraid. People have trepidation. People are worried about their health care, Medicaid expansion. People are worried about their jobs, the mass layoffs, the indiscriminate just layoffs of people, quote unquote, temporary workers, some that have been working 20 plus years and just transitioned to another position. And they've been in their position less than 2 years. They got the axe. And, there are people that are afraid because they can't replace that income. What are you hearing from your constituents? The governor said we got a website, with jobs, you can apply there. But what are you hearing from your constituents and how are they dealing with this?
We are hearing lots of feedback from our constituents. People are very concerned, and people are worried about making sure that they can take care of their families. And of course, this is, we are in a time that we haven't, experienced before. And so now we have to, pull on, historically what has happened and be able to build on that. People are concerned. We're getting lots of emails and calls from our constituents. Of course, our congressional delegation is also getting calls from constituents. We're hearing from folks from town halls. But we just want, folks to note that, Virginia is going to hold the line on that. But, we did some very good work during this past legislative session to make sure that, Virginians were taken care of. We did pass a very good budget. We put more funding in public schools and special education. We know that we heard news that there, is an attempt to dismantle the Department of Education as well. That's going to greatly impact all of us. We, within, Virginia's budget, we did expand child care. We put forth some, good measures on maternal health. We tried to lower tuition, and we definitely supported our HBCUs. We invested in affordable housing and eviction prevention. We boosted up wages, particularly for bonuses for teachers, our state employees, our essential workers. And so we are here for working families. We're here to make sure that we give a boost to education. And so, of course, the governor right now has 30 days from the adjournment of the legislative session to act. And, of course, on tomorrow, March 24th, he has to act on over 900 pieces of legislation. And so far, he's only acted upon 180 of them.
Right.
So it's like so the governor has several things to do. Either he can veto a piece of legislation, or he can amend a piece of legislation, or he doesn't have to do anything. So if he doesn't do anything with a piece of legislation, it does go into law. So we're ready for whatever he brings down the pike. We go back into what we call reconvene, or what we call vote veto session on April 2nd, which is only 2 weeks from now, to address everything that the governor did. And he also not only has to decide on what he wants to do with those 900 pieces of legislation, he also has to decide on a well-balanced budget, what to do with that. And so we will be working diligently on April 2nd to, make sure that the people of the Commonwealth of Virginia are well taken care of. But we're just waiting for, our governor, who has aligned himself with the federal administration, unfortunately, to act. And, as far as like the jobs that our governor is touting, he said that, we got 250,000 jobs. I mean, really, there is not a one-to-one transition from, federal jobs, the credentials that our federal workers have. I'm a former civil servant. There's not a one-to-one transition with, those public jobs or state-supported jobs. A lot of jobs that have been touted, are jobs that don't even match the credentials or the work history of our federal employees. So I think, that's you've loaded up about the opportunities that are available. And we know that, and I've sat on many committees, hiring committees at the state level. I've been in higher education for over 20 plus years, and we know that there is a process, and sometimes that is a barrier for people to get immediate access to help. So right now we're just trying to make sure that people have the resources that they need to take care of their families. And so that means not only having access to workforce opportunities, but if they need access to assistance with anything that they need, like whether it's utilities, whether it's access to fresh produce or food or anything like that, or anything that they need to make sure that they're well taken care of, we are there as resources for them.
Absolutely. Now, I want us to delve into, this is our last part of the show, I want us to delve into a few pieces of legislation that you helped to champion, because I want our listeners to know that the things that you're doing, that your colleagues are doing on the Hill in Richmond are just not for other people, but they impact people right here, your next door neighbors, persons that you worship with at church, that you see at the grocery store, at the gas station, and the like.
Yes. So we pushed forth pretty monumental pieces of legislation. As a whole, we did put forth the 3 constitutional amendments. One that for reproductive freedom, and as well as the right to marry, as well as the restoration of voting rights. And so that process, to push forth those constitutional amendments means that we have to get the majority again in order to push forth those constitutional amendments again in 26, so that they can be on the November 26 ballot for the rest of the citizens of the Commonwealth to be able to vote on those constitutional amendments. Of course, we pushed forth the raising of the minimum wage. We had big pieces of legislation called the Momnibus, which really addressed maternal health and well-being to combat the issues of maternal mortality and morbidity, and reproductive justice here in the Commonwealth. As far as personally, for me, I'm an educator, but I'm a former engineer. But I helped push forth legislation that made it easier for folks to transition and get provisional licenses to address the teacher workforce shortages, particularly in career, technical, and education. I know I faced lots of barriers when I transitioned from being an engineer to a K-12 educator. And so we tried to make that process a little bit easier so that, our credentials could marry over into the public education realm. And also we did, I'm also appointed to the Commission to End Hunger. And so one of the big pieces of legislation that we put forth that does not need the governor's signature was a resolution to task the Commission to End Hunger to do a food mapping initiative. We haven't had a food desert mapping initiative since 2014, so we're working off of old data. And so this food mapping initiative is not just what is the distance that the communities are from a grocery store, but do you have access? Do you have transportation access to fresh produce? What are the socioeconomic conditions? And overlay all of that information into the granular level so that we can have good data in order to put forth legislation to combat food insecurity and to eradicate food apartheid zones. So those are some of the things that we're proud of. The governor did just sign the Cash Now Act, which the chief co-patron was by my colleague, Delegate Phil Hernandez. I was also a chief co-patron on that piece of legislation where dealing with unclaimed property. That did have an emergency clause on it, so it's effective immediately. And we don't have to wait until July 1 for that to go into effect. So we put forth lots of legislation to put money back into the hands of Virginians. I know one of the budget amendments that I put forward was to make sure that our public transportation system here in our area, HRT, that public transit did not have to face tolling fees on express lanes. And so that was a tremendous cost. And so that's going to translate to lower public transportation costs for people to get around in the Hampton Roads area. And so we've done lots of things to make sure that Virginians are well taken care of and putting money back into localities, putting money back into the hands of working families.
Absolutely. And then when we talk about legislation, I mean, the Democrats, since taking the House and then also keeping the Senate, we've seen tremendous amount of bills passed for the people. You know, a lot of times, especially now, we forget that it's our government for the people, by the people. And just, you know, when we take a look at legislation passed, the pro-labor legislation, the minimum wage, increasing minimum wage incrementally to $15 an hour by 2027, which is right around the corner. Also tackling drug costs and medical expenses, which prohibits creditors and debt collectors from charging interest or late fees on medical debt until 90 days after the final invoice deadline. It also prohibited predatory collection practices for garnishing wages, placing liens on foreclosure of somebody's personal property. I mean, these are real things that are happening to real people, and you're passing real bills to help these people. Establishing the prescription drug affordability board to review drug costs, set caps on high cost medication, maternal health. Now this bill, when it passed, I thought it was just crazy that it had to be passed, but it was good that it did. But unconscious bias training, passed by Delegate Hayes and Senator Locke, requiring unconscious bias and cultural competency. Check this out. For training as part of continuing education required for physicians to renew their license. In other words, treat people right.
Right. Because we know that systemic racism is embedded into our health system, unfortunately. And so, you know, we just want to make sure that everyone is taken care of, everyone is treated equitably. And so we're waiting, you know, for our governor to act on that legislation.
Absolutely. And just more and more bills that you talked a lot about education, strong communities, family first economy, and then also the budget, you know, passing millions of dollars for this local cities, you know, to help fund $14.4 million for affordability programs, for financial assistance, Pell Grant eligible, that for placed on students from Norfolk, Portsmouth, Newport News, you know, again, all here in Hampton Roads.
The support caps in education so that, you know, more counselors, you know, lifting those support caps was tremendous. Giving $1,000 bonuses to teachers, that's tremendous. Absolutely.
And supporting our public education while federal government is dismantling our Department of Education to hurt public education and low-income students. But, you know, we're thankful that we have legislators and friends like you in our General Assembly to ensure that, you know, our voices are heard, but not just heard, but action has taken place. So, you know, again, we'll see what the governor does on tomorrow. He's got till tomorrow to act, and we'll see what happens on April 2nd. But, you know, again, I would just want to thank you for working in your calling because, like I said, it is a calling.
It is definitely a calling.
You know,
it is not for the weak.
not for the weak, but we thank you for your work, and we're praying for you as always. And as always, I love stopping in your office on the Hill just to get a little spiritual boost when I'm working up there. So I appreciate you too, my friend.
I definitely appreciate you. It's always good talking with you all and making sure that folks are informed.
Absolutely. That's the Delegate Bonita Anthony here representing us here in Hampton Roads and more specifically the university, Norfolk State University. This is Looking Back, Looking Forward 2025 Legislative Session Review. Until next time, be good, be great, God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.